Alex, it's a very powerful piece of investigative documentary filmmaking. Thank you very much for bringing it here. I feel quite emotional, so steady my nerves, and we're going to open to the audience really quickly for questions. But I want to start by asking at what point you got involved. The 2016 moment is obviously absolutely crucial in the film. How much before that were you involved?
It was actually significantly before. I mean, I mentioned in the film, Trevor Burney, the producer out of Northern Ireland, got me involved in doing a short for ESPN. We called it Ceasefire Massacre, all about just a kind of short version of the story centering around the soccer match, or the football match, sorry. And I was very moved when I went there by the struggle of the families to try to uncover the truth. Just this essential desire and need to try to figure out what happened. And so I thought there might be a story in that. And in fact, if I look back at Ceasefire Massacre now, there are a number of things we got wrong at the time that I think we subsequently did better on. So it was a long-term struggle over about, I guess, maybe 3 years, you know, and culminating with the McGuire report. But it did seem, I was moved to make the film by the families.
And so Trevor started introducing you to the families. Can you lay out a little bit what the process was like of realizing this might be a feature project?
Well, I think it started when we really couldn't solve the fundamental mysteries of the film initially, and it's one of those things that started to haunt me. You know, why this village? You know, it just seemed out of place, and yet, and at the time, we had theories about why it might have been connected to an Irish American who was connected to the peace process. All of that turned out to be wrong, because we didn't know then about this gang that was actually operating in the area and so forth and so on. And then over time, it also started to reverberate with me with some other things that I was doing that had to do with both how we reckon with the past and also this peculiar tension between intelligence and either solving or preventing crimes. You know, there's a project I'm working on now where basically it's a drama, but I've done some documentaries about it as well. It's all about 9/11, and the fact was that the CIA was engaged in its own picture building and knew 18 months prior to 9/11 that there were two members, two hijackers ultimately, but two members of this terror gang that were in the United States, and yet they didn't tell the FBI at all. It was only afterwards. And even today, there's still a reckoning going on with that, because I think one of the interesting things that happens, and there's still many mysteries surrounding Loughinisland and also the role of the British intelligence services in it. But one of the interesting things that happens is that Daniel Ellsberg talks about it when he recalls a discussion with Henry Kissinger. When you start getting secret information, it makes you feel more intelligent and more powerful than other people. And ultimately, you begin to develop a peculiar kind of contempt for other people because they are not as much in the know as you are. And that begins a corrupting process that allows you to always believe that the end justifies the means, and therefore you never need to be held to account for anything that you do. And so those kinds of things were reverberating as I was thinking about going back in. At the same time, you know, for me, not having had the personal history of having gone through Northern Ireland, it was, I tried to simplify one aspect of it, which was, it was a murder. You know, who done it and why? Yeah. And that's the movie.
And was there a crucial moment in the research process where you felt like, had you not had this one interview, had you not found this one person, and maybe, you know, maybe you can't talk about it, maybe it's someone who's chosen to be anonymous, but it feels like Jimmy is a really key.
Yes, Jimmy Binns is absolutely key. Though it's interesting, when we did the interview with Jimmy Binns, he mentions Hawthorne. We didn't, at the time we were interviewing Jimmy Binns, we didn't have a full understanding of who Hawthorne was. So that's how this happens. You know, you slowly keep digging and digging and digging. Barry McCaffrey had done an extraordinary amount of digging and had been leaked this document. That was another piece of the picture. And so that was, we just kept at it step by step by step. But yes, Jimmy Binns was terribly important. If he hadn't come forward, and Jimmy Binns gives you a kind of insider's view of what it must have been like to be in the RUC at the time. And also he's a very compelling figure. I mean, he's a guy who wanted to do the right thing. And he was surrounded with a lot of people who necessarily weren't doing the right thing.
Let's open to questions from the audience. We've got a couple mics and we'll take questions from you guys.
This one there.
Okay, great. Just here if you wait for the mic.
Hi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the movie. My question is that in the movie, you've obviously taken the step of naming the specific individuals involved in the murder, the alleged people who committed the murder. But obviously there must have been specific individuals within senior figures within the police, and there must have been senior figures within the British government who would have made the call, you know, to quash the investigation or, you know, to do the cover-up. And I guess my question is, do you know who those senior figures are? And if so, was there a reason that you decided not to specifically make them the target of your documentary?
Why I didn't make the target the people who refused to cooperate?
No, sorry. So, you know, the actual cover-up and the, you know,
yes.
the informants, why... That seems to really be the point of your documentary, that, you know, there's this system of covering up and using informants, but there must have been individual people behind that policy. But the documentary doesn't name and shame kind of the people who would have ultimately been responsible for the cover-up, and I was wondering what the reason was behind that.
One of the reasons is that many of those people we wanted to talk to wouldn't talk to us. Obviously, you know, Ronnie Hawthorne wouldn't talk to us either. Albert Carroll, I would say, is named, and I think he is a critical figure. But higher up, it becomes more and more difficult to understand who did what to whom. I mean, that's part of the mystery that that we don't know how to solve yet. So it wasn't like we didn't ask questions or try to figure it out. I couldn't get close enough to the people at the top, if there were people at the top, or to understand how the orders were transmitted, if they were transmitted. You know, it kind of reminded me of, there was a famous killing of a Chilean general named Rene Schneider, allegedly at the order and behest of Henry Kissinger, in a film I did called The Trials of Henry Kissinger. And we were asking Seymour Hersh about it, who wrote a very detailed biography of Kissinger, very critical. And you know, we asked him, well, how do we know Kissinger did it? You know, was there any record of the order? He said, do you think that any order like that would ever be written down? You know, it's not how it's done. And so it's very difficult to get at it. But there are records, and the British government does have records, which would be useful to get, that might shed light on this. And that's one of the reasons I made the film, because you know, a number of films of mine deal with secrets. And how too many secrets are being kept by governments from us, the people. And so that's one area of inquiry I think would be good to make.
Right. Another question here?
Hi there. Thank you for an absolutely astonishing film. I think there's a major difference between America and Britain, going back to this question, and that is that the British government have a wonderful record of putting everything down on paper. The Americans don't. I've done a little bit of campaigning on the Pat Finucane case. I'm sure everybody knows here, but a solicitor who was killed in circumstance which does involve informers and whatever. And one of the reasons why the British government is so paranoid about releasing information is almost certainly the names are there. Whereas when I've been doing this campaign, talking to American journalists, they said, well, of course, in America, they're far, he put it in rather patronizing terms, and I don't mean this to sound, he said, we don't write the names down. Whereas in Britain, the information is all there. So, for example, in the campaigning on the Guildford 4 case, one of the extraordinary things when that finally came out is all the paperwork was there. And I think one of the things I'm inspired by your film, hopefully going forward on the Pat Finucane case, is we can try and, as far as you've done, because you've gone further than in almost any other case I have come across in terms of coming to the truth. And I understand what this woman here is saying about we want one step further, but compared with the Finucane case and all those other cases, you've achieved an astonishing amount, and congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, and obviously, I mean, obviously the sequence at the end with the car and the pile of crushed cars, I mean, that's very much intended to go to the hope that perhaps, you know, you all get at some of those records that are buried.
Question here. I think there are many wonderful things about this film, but one of the points that resonated with me is that you took a very particular story and gave it the respect that it did not get for 22 years. But also in so doing, you did shed light on many other kinds of cases like this that we are aware of around the world. And it made me think a bit about the recent case of the judge in Argentina, Alfredo Nuzman, whose probable murder has been called a suicide, or some of you may know about the case of Stephen Lawrence in this country, where his murder was not solved for many years and finally came out with a conclusion. There was a report that was done that said that the police were in fact guilty of institutional racism. And I guess I wanted to know if you could tell us, is this a sort of mission that you are on, sort of in the Terrence Malick vein, to try to use the power of film to solve the kinds of mysteries and injustices that are not actually being addressed properly by the justice system?
Well, I mean, I guess I don't see it in quite that grand a way. I tend to go from film to film, but I do understand that there are things that I'm interested in over time. And yes, over time I've tended to go into incidents that seem to have a kind of built-in, agreed-upon narrative that everybody seems okay with. But then if you go in, you realize that actually that's just a fiction that's been made up so that we can all move on. And there's a lot in this film that resonates for me about how do we reckon with the past, and what is the past, and is it a series of recollections? How do we get to the bottom of what that is? But by digging into these sort of received narratives, you try to get at the truth. I think that's what's powerful about what the families did. They just wanted to know the truth. So yes, a lot of my films are about that, trying to get somehow to the truth. And the great thing about films is they reach a lot of people, and then everybody can collectively, you know, hopefully be energized about that idea of doing what, in this case, the families at Loughinisland did, is to keep digging.
Questions from the, okay, question back here, and then another one here in the middle.
Hi, this is quite a small detail, but I just noticed in the scene where you had the private investigator footage of Hawthorne, right? You can see Hawthorne's face very clearly, but the wife's face isn't clear. It's kind of, she's moving and you can't see what her face looks like. Was that intentional, or was that just an issue of like what footage you could show? Because I'm sure Hawthorne didn't clear that, right? You didn't like ask him to put that in the film.
No, he didn't clear it. We did send a letter to Hillary and to Ronnie, as well as to Taylor and also to McMullen. I think a decision was made, and there was a lot of legal wrangling over this film, but a decision was made that because she wasn't one of the people in the car, that that we'd blur her face. But these are not easy decisions to make. That's just the one we made.
Here in the middle.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. First of all, just absolutely an excellent piece of journalism, and sorry, hi, I'm here. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, first up, excellent piece of journalism. You know, fantastic job, and these are the stories that need to come out. You know, I come from County Down, and albeit I lived in an estate where the UVF, you know, operated in North Down. And so I'm going to to start off. If you indulge me, I'll make an observation, and then I've got a specific question. One of the questions that you raised in the documentary itself was, you know, was it a price worth paying? You know, was this state collusion in covering up murder? Was it worth it? Growing up as I say, in a housing estate in North Down, we had Ronnie Hawthorns in our estate, and you know, it was clear to everyone that these people were above the law, because you know, the sectarian murder is actually a very small part of what these organizations do. A lot of it's organized crime, and their wealth is visible to those who live around them. And they act as recruiting sergeants for young boys who see these people as role models, because growing up in these estates, life's not easy. So it was good that you raised that question, and the answer from my own perspective, growing up in that kind of environment, is absolutely no, it wasn't. And that's before you even bring into letting these people literally get away with murder. Specifically on a question. And look, taking a recent example like Hillsborough, which was another example of police cover-up, getting to the truth is a very important thing, and it's obviously the first step in a process. But as the first questioner raised, at some point people have to be held accountable for this. And while for those of us who grew up in Northern Ireland, we know that the special branch's legacy is coming. We are getting more and more aware of some of the stuff they covered up, but this does go right to the top of the British state, and at some point, the sequel to this documentary must be who knew what and when and who signed off on this, and they should surely see their day in court in the way that Mr. Hawthorne and others didn't. I'd like to know your view on that.
Could you boil that down? My view on.
Sorry. So yeah, on the idea that this is the information piece, but do you feel that the next stage of this is actual justice? And I'm not just talking about the people who pulled the trigger, but also those who subsequent cover-up.
Yes, I do, and films and books and articles, they're living documents, and you hope that others here will follow on, and I will, to the extent that I can, follow on and seek to discover what I can. But it doesn't end here. This is not the end, it's the beginning.
Barry, can we get a mic here?
Alex, I've been asked by the families to personally thank you for what has been an exceptionally emotional journey for all of the families. They entered this process with an enormous sense of trepidation, fear, given how they had been treated by the authorities for 22 years. Obviously, in the film, nobody knew how that day on the 9th of June last year was going to unfold. They let you into their lives on what was the most sensitive day of their lives, and they've asked me to, from the bottom of their hearts and also the bottom of mine, thank you for the sensitive manner in which you have dignified the memory of their loved ones.
Thank you.
they also appreciate that they have benefited from the opportunity to present their story in the fashion which you have, but that they are representative. The weapons that were imported from South Africa killed as many as 229 people, perhaps, and the life history, life experience that they have had is replicated across hundreds of homes, and the story which has been sensitively detailed by yourself is one which resides in many homes. So, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time for questions. Would you like to close with any thoughts, or tell us when people can see the film?
Oh yes, so the film will open theatrically across the United Kingdom starting on November 10th, I believe. There'll be more news about that in the days ahead.
And we've got another screening tomorrow. So
Correct, another screening tomorrow, so everybody who was engaged by it, please tell your friends. Where is the screening tomorrow?
Picture House Central.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all very much for coming.
And Alex Gibney, thank you so much for allowing us to screen No Stone Unturned.
Thanks, Tricia.
Thanks to Jigsaw and Fine Point Films as well. Really.